Closing the door to immigration. Nice picture, eh? All right. What you need to realize is, yes, Canada needed all kinds of expansion and immigration to settle the prairies and things like that, but not everybody is exactly happy about it, because many of these people feel that they're taken away from the original country that was English Canada. All right. Not everyone was a fan of the immigration that was happening as a result of SIFT and open door policy. Labor organizations seen it as a threat. British Canadians feared that it would alter the British character of the country, and the French feared that they would become even more of a minority and their culture and language would be lost. There's a change. Quebec fearing that their culture and language might be lost. Hey, never heard that argument before. Business liked the idea of the immigration policy because it proved a cheap labor pool for them to hire out. Okay, so you got to remember, a lot of these people who are coming to Canada were very poor, didn't have much money. And it provided a cheap labor pool for them to hire out of. Many of these people didn't have jobs and would work for almost any price. Immigration was essentially an issue in BC. Where many felt that their jobs were threatened by the large number of Asian immigrants who would do the job for cheaper than many of their European counterparts. BC pressured the federal government to do something as a result. Frank Oliver replaced Sifton as the Minister of the Interior. Oliver agreed with reducing the number of immigrants, and he introduced a more selective immigration policy. He especially agreed with limiting the number of non-white immigrants. So here's an example of a racist policy that was actually a full-on government policy. Now, today this would never fly, but you have to understand, back in this time period, the white European males still dominated government. Provincial governments began to restrict Chinese, Japanese, and East Indian immigration as well, because many European people, especially the English, felt that these groups were undercutting and being a problem within society. The construction of the CPR and the Cariboo Gold Rush brought large amounts of Chinese immigrants to BC. They comprised the largest group of Asian immigrants. 1891, there's 9,400 Chinese living in BC alone. Many had planned to return back to China, but thanks to racist tendencies and lack of pay, many of them could not afford to leave, so they just settled. Majority lived in Chinatowns, which became places of business and cultural organizations. In Vancouver today, there's Chinatown downtown. Victoria has a Chinatown as well. Majority of the Chinese workers were employed in the salmon canning and coal mining industries on Vancouver Island. Many companies wanted to hire Chinese because they worked hard and for low wages. Here's a shackle of Chinatown in Victoria back in the day. British Columbia, the Golden Mountain. It was the highest labor organizations that become key to getting exclusionary legislation against Chinese, because they felt their jobs were being threatened as a result of Chinese undercutting it. You have to understand, these labor organizations were out to look out for their people, to get their people the best pay, best conditions, best benefits possible, and then you have another group of people who would do it for no benefits, hardly any pay. So you can see where the labor organizations would get met. Groups were formed to put up protests against the Asian immigration. The Asiatic Exclusion League is an example of this. Things came to a head in 1907 when Lieutenant Governor James Dunsmuir refused to sign a bill to exclude Japanese immigrants from entering Canada. So here we have James Dunsmuir of the Dunsmuir family, of the Dunsmuir coal family, who hired had a lot of these immigrant workers working for him. He refuses to sign a law basically saying Japanese immigrants are no longer welcome, and things hit the fan. The actions at Dunsmuir had protesters march on Vancouver City Hall, and a riot ensued. Roughly 1,000 demonstrators marched through the streets of Chinatown and Japanese sections of the city, damaging businesses, etc. Basically, they're trying to put fear into them. The riot focused international attention on Vancouver, and because of this, Prime Minister Laurier was embarrassed, and as a result of Japanese being a British ally, Laurier apologized and created the Royal Commission to look into the matter. You're going to see throughout time there's all kinds of Royal Commissions in Canada, and these Royal Commissions are generally brought about after something bad has happened, and generally they come out and they find a little bit of information, but they don't find the whole thing. The government still went about setting a 400-person limit on the number of Japanese that were allowed in Canada per year. So again, they weren't able to ban them outright, but they limited it to 400 people only. As you can see, here's an example of what was left of a business after the riot in 1907. Continuous passage only. So another way that they decided to try and limit immigration to Canada was basically to say if you leave a country, you must come straight to Canada. You cannot stop, you cannot pass go, you cannot collect $200, etc., etc. So basically, what they said is if you if you leave your country and stop in another place, another country, you are ineligible to come into Canada. You had to come by continuous passage. William Lyon Mackenzie King, Laurier's Minister of Labour, was in charge of the Royal Commission, looked into the Vancouver riots. He also took a look at the immigration of people from Asia as a whole and how they had been enticed to come into Canada to work. Since 1904, CPR agents had been encouraging Sikhs to immigrate because they were cheap labor and they would work on the building of the railway and new railway lines. It was difficult to restrict them because they were British subjects and could not be denied access to Canada. So basically, because they were British subjects, they could come to Canada freely because of obviously connections with Britain. So what they decided to do is they brought in a law to prevent any more East Indians from immigrating. The Immigration Act of 1906 was brought in. Now you have to understand, many of these ships that brought many of these people here could not come straight here because of fuel reasons, food reasons, things like that. So they had to stop. So the government realizes this and puts in place the continuous passage rule. Okay. The amendment was challenged in 1914 when the Komagata Maru, a steamer chartered by Gurdeep Singh, arrived in Vancouver, in particular with 354 Sikh immigrants. These people had stopped over in country on the way here for supplies and fuel, and when they got here, the Canadian government said, nope, thanks for coming out. 1906 laws passed, said you must have continuous passage. These people were escaping persecution, these people were escaping atrocities, and yet they were forced to sit on a boat for an extended period of time in Vancouver. In fact, they made 23 stops in China and Japan. It was immediately quarantined by the Canadian authorities. That people weren't allowed to leave the ship. The continued passage rule was invalid, many people argued. Officials and police officers tried boarding the ship, but they were bombed with sticks and bottles to keep them away. July 23rd, the ship was escorted out of the Vancouver harbor by the cruiser Rainbow, which was the one and only ships that Canada had in its navy. As you can see, here's some pictures of the Komagata Maru in the port of Vancouver. Right, and here's another picture of many of the immigrants or potential immigrants to Canada in the picture. End of the slideshow. We will be working on this again tomorrow, but can you please do me a huge favor and come to class, and I want you to answer this question for me. How many passengers were on the Komagata Maru? That's the question, the entrance slip into class tomorrow. Thank you very much again. How many people were on the Komagata Maru?